CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Ukraine's President Zelensky calls for a jet coalition between Western allies as he visits the UK for talks on military aid. Heading for a runoff, Turkey's presidential election goes to a second round as the opposition fails to oust President Erdogan. Choose France, says President Emmanuel Macron, as he courts Tesla CEO Elon Musk and heads of other multinational companies to bring their business to the country. And 3,000 exhibitors from 12 countries arrive in Ningbo to boost China's trade with Central and Eastern Europe. Four people have been killed in a Russian missile strike on a hospital in eastern Ukraine. The regional governor has called for all residents in the city of Adviivka to evacuate immediately. Meanwhile, 4 people were injured in a blast at a barber shop in the Russian-controlled city of Luhansk. Local media say a grenade exploded inside the shop. The acting interior minister for the so-called Luhansk People's Republic is reported to be among those injured. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has met the UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at his country residence outside of London. During the meeting, Zelensky repeated his request for more fighter jets in order to control the sky, saying he wants to create a jet coalition among Western allies. Earlier, Britain said it would send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine. Rishi Sunak says it's a crucial moment for Ukraine's resistance, adding that the UK would not let Kyiv down. Britain's the latest stop on Zelensky's tour of Europe after visits to Italy, Germany and France. Well, our correspondent Julia Chapman is in London. So, Julia, the UK sending hundreds of attack drones to Ukraine. What else came out of this meeting?
This was a surprise visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the UK on Monday, and there were lots of warm words, a friendly hug between the two leaders who described each other as friends when they met at Chequers, the country residence of the British Prime Minister. But certainly we got this announcement from Downing Street, the UK government saying that it has offered more weaponry to Ukraine, more defensive missiles, hundreds of them, as well as long-range attack drones. And this comes after the announcement that was made last week when the UK became the first country to announce or confirm that there were already long-range cruise missiles provided by the UK inside Ukraine. So a big stepping up of the UK military aid to the country. But we heard from the Ukrainian president talking more about something that has been at the top of his agenda for months now, fighter jets. He is very keen to get more control over the skies of Ukraine, an area where Ukraine has somewhat been at a disadvantage compared to Russia in recent months. Ukraine believes that would make a very big difference. And the UK has already confirmed that there will be fighter pilots, Ukrainian pilots, trained here in this country, but we understand that's not going to happen until the summer. And even when it does, there needs to be a pledge from the United States to allow pilots to be trained on F-16 fighter jets, because that is what Ukraine is ultimately asking for, not the fighter jets that the UK has.
So, Julia, we've had this additional commitment of aid by the UK. There have also been commitments from other allies as well. Has Zelensky's tour of Europe been a success?
He certainly suggested that it had been when asked by journalists today. He has, of course, been visiting Rome, Paris and Berlin on this trip, and it was in that last capital where he got a really significant pledge from the German government, some more $3 billion in weaponry, and that is the biggest pledge that Germany has issued so far since the war began last year. Certainly a welcome move from the Ukrainian perspective, and one that comes after criticism that Germany hadn't been doing enough to support Ukraine. But this visit really comes, as all of Zelensky's visits abroad do, at a critical juncture for the war in Ukraine, amid a long-awaited counter-offensive that officials in Kyiv say simply hasn't happened yet because Ukraine is still waiting for deliveries of weapons. We constantly hear all of these pledges from Western nations for more and more aid, but not all of it reaches Ukraine as quickly as officials there would like. And so this was Zelensky's effort to make sure that those deliveries are accelerated to help Ukraine with the next phase of this conflict.
Julia, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Julia Chapman, in London. Moscow says the UK's latest military aid shipment to Ukraine won't change the course of the conflict. The Kremlin says its forces have shot down a long-range Storm Shadow missile, also supplied by the UK. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. Stuart, tell us more about these remarks from the Kremlin.
Yeah, these come from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, and in terms of how normal they are, that is a pretty standard response from Russia when new countries, when countries promise new military aid, saying that, first of all, it won't make any difference to the so-called special military operation, but acknowledging that, of course, takes a negative view of the situation. And frequently the Kremlin will use the phrase pumping these countries with weapons in order to try to imply that this is something that should not be done. Throughout this special military operation, of course, Russia has shown no desire itself to pull back its military, although, interestingly, on Monday, the Russian Ministry of Defense said it had shot down a Storm Shadow missile. That's the first time that's been recorded. When the UK promised that delivery, it said it was going to take a proportionate response, but we haven't yet seen, or at least not obviously or publicly, what that response may mean. In terms of how the Russian embassy in the UK has reacted, it says that this is effectively a waste of British taxpayers' money, but indeed the UK government says that it's important to stand by what it described as its friends and allies when it comes to these matters.
And Stuart, Russian officials have also been commenting on the fighting that's taking place around Bakhmut.
Yeah, that's right. Its latest assessment is that Ukrainian forces did attempt to break through Russian defences in the city, but it says that all of them failed and that the Russian front lines are still the same as they were before. This comes the same day that there is more contention between Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner military corporation, and also the Russian Ministry of Defense, with a report published by the Wall Street Journal alleging that US intelligence believes Prigozhin offered to supply information to the Ukrainian intelligence authorities in return for the Ukrainian army stopping its assault on Bakhmut. He denies that categorically, says that he's never spoken to any Ukrainian intelligence officials, nor the military, either in person or by phone call. And the Kremlin is calling that report an example of propaganda and fake news.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. At least 5 people have been killed after a powerful storm hit western Myanmar. Cyclone Mocha brought winds of up to 210 kilometres an hour and one of the strongest storms to hit the region in years. Myanmar's Rakhine state, where 6 million people are already in need of humanitarian aid, was worst hit, with the majority of buildings in the state capital damaged. Residents in neighbouring Bangladesh also had homes destroyed, but there were no reports of casualties. Around 13,500 weapons have been handed in to Serbian authorities under a month-long amnesty. It follows 2 mass shootings in early May, which left 17 people dead. Automatic weapons, anti-tank launchers and hand grenades were among the haul. The amnesty ends on the 8th of June, after which time the government's warned of strict penalties for those in possession of an unlicensed weapon. Thailand's 2 main opposition parties have agreed to form a coalition government after winning the largest share of the vote in Sunday's election. The Move Forward Party and Pheu Thai dominated the ballot. However, the military-appointed Senate holds the power to choose the next Prime Minister. Record numbers of voters turned out for the ballot as the country deals with economic stagnation. Turkey's presidential election looks set to go to a runoff vote as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan performed better than expected. He got the most votes but failed to pass the 50% threshold needed to clinch a decisive victory. Ahead of Sunday's poll, it was widely expected that his rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu could unseat Erdogan after 20 years in power. The Turkish lira and the Istanbul Stock Exchange are both trading lower on the result. Our correspondent Michal Bardavid is in Istanbul. Michal, what's the latest on the vote counts?
Yes, the latest statement came from the chairman of the High Election Board. He stated that regarding the latest updates, 100% of the ballot boxes in Turkey had been opened. The voter turnout here was almost 89%. He added that there are still 35,000 votes that need to be entered from abroad, but now that even if Erdogan or his main rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu received all of those votes, they cannot win this round. They cannot get more than 50% of the votes. Therefore, he announced that they have the initial results as Erdogan with 49.5% and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu at 44.8%. So we are definitely going to witness a runoff election between these two candidates, President Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, on May 28th. In the early hours of the day, Erdogan had made some optimistic remarks. He emphasized that he had secured a lead of 2.6 million votes over his rival Kılıçdaroğlu. And Kılıçdaroğlu, who represents a six-party alliance, he's the leader of the main opposition Republican People's Party. But with the other five leaders together, he stood tall, united. He stated that he would defeat Erdogan in a runoff. Meanwhile, in the parliamentary elections that were also held yesterday, Erdogan's alliance, the People's Alliance, managed to hold the majority of the seats.
So we are facing a runoff then. What happens next?
Well, parties now have the opportunity to make their objections to the early results. So Wednesday is the last day to present any kind of objections to these results. Thursday is going to be the last day that the High Election Board could make their decisions on these objections. And Friday is the day that they're going to declare the official final results. Now we're going to be witnessing a major campaign in 2 weeks. One key person that may be influential now is going to be the third presidential candidate from yesterday's election, who is Sinan Oğan, who is a nationalist candidate. He had managed to secure about 5% of the votes, so he may be influential if he decides to endorse one of the two candidates. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We have certain red lines, such as fighting against terrorism and sending refugees back. We have voiced these conditions before.
Now, there may be some negotiations that will take place to Sinan Oğan. Whether or not they're going to offer him to join the Nation Alliance is not clear. That can be one of the options. Before the election, the last couple of days, we had some concerning developments here in Turkey. For example, there were some deep fake videos that were circulating online of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and there were some accusations by Recep Tayyip Erdogan of some international interference, that the United States had been backing the opposition. So we may see some interesting developments in the upcoming 2 weeks during the campaign period until May 28th.
Mikhail, thank you. Our correspondent Mikhail Bardavid in Istanbul. Well, let's talk to Muzaffer Chanel, who's an assistant professor of international relations at Istanbul Kültür University. Welcome to the programme. So polls in the run-up to Sunday's election suggested this would be much closer. Has it been a surprise to see Erdogan so close to achieving this majority needed to avoid a runoff?
Actually, till the last 3 or 4 days, the poll shows that Kılıçdaroğlu is going to win, but the Erdogan's propaganda, the negative propaganda and the pejorative propaganda regarding the Kılıçdaroğlu and the opposition quite looks like the more, let's say, attention of the society, especially regarding the PKK and also the calling for the 15 July coup and so on and so forth. It will create an instability, and the people do not want to be an instability. Therefore, the fear of instability, that's one of the reasons. The second one is about the last 3 days or last days, oppositions that became, let's say, not to fight well, especially some members of the coalition are hesitating to be in front of, like all together, like the Meral Akşener do not want to. The E-Party, which means the party, good party, they do not want to give a, let's say, all together with them, which is also another reason that this coalition will not be managed somehow. Thirdly, that most important, all these preparations of the Erdogan's, let's say, supporters are when we see in the election polls. Election stations are quite successful than the opposition one, and and as you know that Erdogan is it's a safe, but it's not a fair election, because Erdogan is all media is already in his hand. He used very effectively the media to a black propaganda towards the Kılıçdaroğlu and the coalition, which is without same threat.
Muzaffar Chanel, clearly strong points of view on both sides of this argument. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Muzaffar Chanel from Istanbul Culture University. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 1 month since the start of the conflict in Sudan, the United Nations says almost 1 million people have now been displaced. And France's President Macron woos international business leaders, including Elon Musk, telling them, choose France.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Ukraine's President Zelensky calls for a jet coalition between Western allies as he visits the UK for talks on military aid. Heading for a runoff, Turkey's presidential election goes to a second round as the opposition fails to oust President Erdogan. It's been a month since fighting began in Sudan between the army and the paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces. The United Nations says at least 676 people have been killed in the conflict and almost 1 million displaced. Our correspondent Naba Mohieddin reports.
It's been a rocky and a volatile month in Sudan since armed clashes broke out in the capital Khartoum between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese military on April 15th. The violence killed more than 600 civilians and displaced about 700,000 people internally, and 150,000 people have entered neighboring countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, and Chad, according to the United Nations. The World Health Organization said more than 28 hospitals in Sudan were attacked, and that made the Sudanese overwhelmed health system to work only with 30% of its capacity, which is warning of a looming health catastrophe. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating. People are in need for food, medicine, and life-saving necessities. There is still water shortages after 4 weeks of clashes. Power outages and telecommunications are still sporadic. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating, and aid workers cannot provide aid for those in need, especially in the capital Khartoum. And despite the agreement signed in Jeddah a week ago to provide humanitarian access or corridors for those in need between the two, this agreement was between the two warring factions, but on the ground, the clashes are still impacting the flow of aid and, of course, the flow of trade. So Sudan right now is in isolation. The trade routes are closed. The main port have suspended its operations until further notice. So the situation, humanitarian situation, health situation, economic situation are deteriorating without a sign of soon relief. People are so hopeful that Jeddah peace talks that started with humanitarian declaration can morph into a political resolution and mediation talks to stop the hostilities and fighting immediately and to restore calm and stability in Sudan after 1 month of fierce clashes. Naba Muhyiddin, CGTN, Madani, Sudan.
The Eurozone economy is forecast to grow faster than previously expected this year. The European Commission forecasts GDP to rise by 1.1%, higher than the 0.9% estimate in February. But the forecast for inflation is still persistently higher. It's expected to average 5.8% across the Eurozone in 2023. Argentina's government has announced a new round of emergency measures as it tries to stave off the country's worst economic crisis in over 20 years. Inflation has spiraled out of control, reaching 109% in April. The central bank is expected to raise its key interest rate by 600 basis points to 97%. Choose France. That's the message from President Emmanuel Macron as he courts international investors who've already pledged to pump billions into the French economy. Elon Musk is among the high-profile guests at an annual summit in Versailles. Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. Ross, what deals has Macron secured and what others could still be struck?
Yeah, hi Robin. It's a major summit that Emmanuel Macron came up with in his first term in office, saying that there needs to be a central point of an annual gathering of business leaders to promote and agree on investment into France. This is the 6th year that it's been taking place. Always a big event for Emmanuel Macron and international business leaders coming from outside France. We know that he's had a sit-down already with Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, SpaceX and Twitter, inside the Palace of Versailles to talk about investment into France from his companies. We know that there's also been several $1 billion of investment every year agreed before and during the summit that's taking place in the Palace of Versailles. There was already been an announcement on Friday, Emmanuel Macron going to Dunkirk, a northern port, to announce the building of a car battery factory by the Taiwanese firm Prologium. There's also been other announcements with Goldman Sachs. We're expecting perhaps investment from Pfizer, the American pharmaceutical giant, IKEA, the Swedish furniture giants and many other firms.
And Ross, President Macron's popularity has rather suffered from those unpopular pension reforms. Will these new deals help shift public attention away from that?
No, this is not the kind of thing that is going to endear him to the masses. We know that there's a protest going on right now, Robin, outside the Palace of Versailles by the CGT, one of France's 2 biggest unions. And they have said this afternoon that the reason that they are demonstrating is to make themselves heard and, quote, saying that the President is welcoming 200 business leaders, but he won't sit down with the unions. So that's their message to the President, that it's all very well having Elon Musk in the Palace of Versailles, but in terms of discussing pension reform for the working man and woman, that's something that they would like to see the government pay more attention to.
Ross, thank you very much. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang has called for the European Union to view China objectively and to understand his country better. He's been meeting his Hungarian counterpart Peter Szijjártó in Beijing, with the pair agreeing to boost cooperation and jointly respond to risks and challenges. Szijjártó said Hungary opposes any so-called decoupling between China and Europe. Boosting trade between China and countries in Central and Eastern Europe is the focus of an annual expo now in its 3rd year. The 2023 event is taking place in China's eastern city of Ningbo. Our correspondent Lu Se-wei reports.
More than 3,000 exhibitors from 12 countries are attending this 5-day event, and they include some non-CEEC countries, including Italy, Germany, and France.
14 products with European Union geographical indications will be displayed. And also screens from Hungary and Slovenia skiing equipment will make their debut. China is also gearing up for more agricultural imports from the CEEC countries.
Of course, business and trade is the focus of the expo, but domains such as technology and health are also covered.
The expo serves as a stage for both sides to further explore business opportunities. Zhejiang plans to introduce many commodities here into supermarkets, e-channel platforms, and other sales channels across the country. Lucy Ray, CGTN, Ningbo.
Conservationists in Kenya say that 10 lions have been killed in the south of the country in the past week, 6 of them in one day on Saturday. They are reported to have been killed after straying into human areas and attacking livestock. Experts say that they're venturing further from managed areas of a national park because of an ongoing drought. The Kenyan Wildlife Service says it's talking to local communities to try and find a resolution. A rural football league in southwest China's Guizhou province is scoring new fans across the region. An opening ceremony launched the tournament of 20 teams with tens of thousands of spectators watching the event. Organised by local villagers, the league aims to encourage more people to participate in sporting events on a grassroots level. Our main stories again. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky calls for a jet coalition between Western allies as he visits the United Kingdom for talks on military aid. Heading for a runoff, Turkey's presidential election goes to a second round as the opposition fails to oust President Erdogan. And choose France, says President Emmanuel Macron, as he courts Tesla CEO Elon Musk and heads of other multinational companies to bring their business to the country. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hi there and welcome to weather forecast over to Europe. Under influence of low pressure system, we're going to have persistent rainfall over the next 2 days across many portions of the continent. We'll see Tuesday light rainfall picking up from northern portion all the way down to the south, potentially a chance of sleet along the Alps. As we look into Wednesday, the precipitation will continue to take place. On the contrary, you will have overcast sky or partly sunny sky in the western portion. When it comes to temperature fluctuation, you're going to have some cooling down, especially in the rainy areas for folks in the western portion, where daily highs are forecast to be around 20 on Tuesday. But moving to Wednesday, temperatures sliding for folks in northern portion. On the contrary, over to Eastern Europe, daily highs are forecast to be around 20 degrees Celsius. And our business and travel outlook, Wednesday, we're going to have 14 to 6 in Copenhagen. Morning showers to be had in Stockholm and Helsinki. Moving down to Mainz, you can see what weather conditions taking place with daily highs around 20, a bit warmer to be had in Kiev and Moscow with daily highs around 24. Eventually back to western portion, around 20 for daily highs in London and Paris on Wednesday, down to Madrid and Lisbon, daily highs be around 25, lowering chances. Well, that's it for now. Stay tuned for more city forecast.